You think on the hardware side, we mentioned Nvidia a bunch of times. Do you think Jensen and Nvidia are going to keep winning?
I think they have the downside that they have to iterate a lot and manufacture a lot. And I think they probably, what they're doing, they do innovate, but I think there's always the chance that there is something who does something fundamentally different, who gets very lucky and then does something. But the problem is, I think, adoption. Like the mode of NVIDIA is probably not just the GPU, it's more like the CUDA ecosystem, and that has evolved over so many, I think, 2 decades. I mean, even back when I was a grad student, I was in a lab, we did biophysical simulations, molecular dynamics, and we had a Tesla GPU back then just for the computations. It was 15 years ago now. And they built this up for a long time. And that's the mode. I think it's not the chip itself, although they have now the money to iterate and build and scale. But then it's really the compatibility. It's like, well, if you're at that scale as a company, why would you go with something risky where it's only a few chips that they can make per year? You go with the big one. But then I do think with LLMs now also it will be easier to design something like CUDA. Like so it took 15 years because it's hard, but then now we have LLMs, we can maybe replicate CUDA.
And I wonder if there will be a separation of the training and the inference compute as we kind of stabilize a bit more and more compute is needed for inference.
That's supposed to be the point of the Grok acquisition. And that's why part of what Vera Rubin is, where they have a new chip with no high bandwidth memory, which is or very little, which is one of the most expensive pieces. It's designed for prefill, which is the part of inference where you essentially do a lot of matrix multiplications, and then you only need the memory when you're doing this autoregressive generation, and you have the KV cache swaps. So they have this new GPU that's designed for that specific use case, and then the cost of ownership per flop or whatever is actually way lower. But I think that NVIDIA's fate lies in the diffusion of AI still. Their biggest clients are still these hyperscale companies, whether it's like Google obviously can make TPUs, Amazon is making Trainium, Microsoft will try to do its own things. And like, so long as the pace of AI progress is high, NVIDIA's platform is the most flexible and people will want that. But if there's stagnation, then creating bespoke chips, there's more time to do it.
It's interesting that NVIDIA is quite active in trying to develop all kinds of different products.
They tried to create areas of commercial value that will use a lot of GPUs.
But they keep innovating, and they're doing a lot of incredible research. So
everyone says the company is super oriented around Jensen and how operationally plugged in he is, and it sounds so unlike many other big companies that I've heard about. And so long as that's the culture, I think that I will expect them to keep progress happening. And it's like he's still in the Steve Jobs era of Apple. So long as that is how it operates, I'm pretty optimistic for their situation, because it's like it is their top order problem, and I don't know if making these chips for the whole ecosystem is the top goal of all of these other companies. They'll do a good job, but it might not be as good of a job.
Since you mentioned Jensen, I've been reading a lot about history and about singular figures in history. What do you guys think about the single man, woman view of history? How important are individuals for steering the direction of history in the tech sector? So, what's NVIDIA without Jensen? You mentioned Steve Jobs. What's Apple without Steve Jobs? What's XAI without Elon? Or DeepMind without Demis?
People make things earlier and faster, where scientifically, many great scientists credit to being in the right place at the right time and still making the innovation, where eventually someone else will still have the idea. So I think that in that way, Jensen is helping manifest this GPU revolution much faster and much more focused than without having a person there it would do. And this is making the whole AI build out faster. But I do still think that eventually like something like ChatGPT would have happened and a build out like this would have happened, but it probably would not have been as fast or like as like I think that's the sort of flavor that is applied.
These individual people are people who are placing bets on something. Some get lucky, some don't. But if you don't have these people at the helm, it will be more diffused. It's almost like investing in a ETF versus individual stocks. The individual stocks might go up, might go down more heavily than an ETF, which is more balanced. It will eventually go up over time. We'll get there, but it's just like like focus. I think is the thing. Passion and focus.
Isn't there a real case to be made that without Jensen, there's not a reinvigoration of the deep learning revolution?
It could have been 20 years later is the thing that I would say.
Yeah. 20
Or like another AI like a deep learning winter could have come if GPUs weren't around.
That could change history completely, because you could think of all the other technologies that could have come in the meantime, and the focus of human civilization the Silicon Valley would be captured by different hype.
But I do think it is, there's certainly an aspect where it was all planned, the GPU trajectory, but on the other hand, it's also a lot of lucky coincidences. For example, or good intuition, like the investment into this, let's say, biophysical simulations, or like, I think it started with video games, and then it just happened to be good at linear algebra, because video games require a lot of linear algebra, and then you have the biophysical simulations, and then, but still, I don't think the master plan was AI. I think there was just, it happened to be Alex Krzyzewski. So someone took these GPUs and like, hey, let's try to train a neural network on that, and it happened to work really well. And I think it only happened because you could purchase those GPUs.
Gaming would have created a demand for faster processors if Nvidia had gone out of business in the early days. That's what I would think. Like, I think that the GPUs would have been different for the AlexNet, but I think like GPUs would still exist at the time of AlexNet and at the time of the Transformer. It was just hard to know if it would be one company as successful or multiple smaller companies with worse chips. But I don't think that's like a 100-year delay. It might be a decade delay.
Well, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decade delay. I mean, I just can't see Intel or AMD doing what Nvidia did.
I don't think it would be a company that exists. I think it would be a different company would rise.
Like Silicon Graphics or something.
So yeah, some company that has died would have done it.
But it does, like, just looking at it, it seems like these singular figures, these leaders, have a huge impact on the trajectory of the world. Obviously, incredible teams behind them. But, having that kind of very singular, almost dogmatic focus is necessary to make progress.
Yeah, I mean, even with GPT, it wouldn't exist if there wasn't a person, Ilya, who pushed for this scaling, right? I mean,
yeah, Dario was also deeply involved in that. You read some of the histories of OpenAI. It almost seems wild thinking about how early these people were like, we need to hook up 10,000 GPUs and take all of OpenAI's compute and train one model. There's a lot of people there that didn't want to do that.
Which is an insane thing to believe. To believe scaling before scaling has any indication that it's going to materialize. Again, singular figures.